Maple Leaf, Witch Detective. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there lived a young and spectacular witch named Maple Leaf St. Clair. Maple was the newest fortune-teller in the bustling half-city of Twine, and her dream was to earn her keep doing what she loved, telling people about the future. She had no idea she'd get caught up in something big and mystifying, but that is the nature of fortunes and fortune-tellers too. They come along when you least expect them. Maple arrived in the big city early one moonday morning, riding a colourful wooden caravan pulled by a second-hand ass named Gunter. She parked in Dreary Lane near Pete's Pies and Patisserie and was welcomed by the invigorating scent of freshly baked crome bread rising through the chilly wind. The aroma gave her an idea. She would spend the next few days doing the rounds among the tea shops to promote her endeavour. Lo and behold, it wasn't long before she picked up business from the local tea ladies, and they claimed she could not only read a fortune, but have it sing and dance and act out a play as well. The great dual metropolis of Twin and Twine was bifurcated by the river Styx, which flowed enthusiastically from Downder in the Southland to the Great Mare somewhere past Northumberland, up into Iceland and out the other side of the world. On Twine's side of the river congregated artists, musicians and actors, while Twine's inhabitants managed the accounts. Maple had spent some of her whole life among the creative oeuvre in the Bohemian Twin and found that, while the half-city was filled with a choice assortment of entertaining delights, earning a decent living to buy herself a proper house was almost impossible. If there was fortune to be found, it was across the river in Twine. Maple's affluent customers tended to be the lion-until-noon sort, so having no clientele in the morning, she took in the width of the Tweedy City, walking easily from Darjeeling Street to Porter Potty Road without much fuss. Her purple and white candy-striped tights exuded a whimsical sense of joie de vivre as she skipped from shop to shopping. She peered through the window of a pet shop and waved at a fresh litter of kittens spilling about a large wooden box. Her palms had been recently crossed with silver, and she was keen to spend it on some of life's little luxuries, such as a pair of knee-high button-up boots crafted from pure Horacian camel-hump leather and a matching quimsy. She passed by Big Bean, the city clock which rang out the daily bells, and Little Bean, a boy whose job was to tinkle a little bell 60 times for every big bell. A job he took very seriously, as people set their sundials by his tinkles. If he skipped a tinkle, the whole system would collapse, he thought. Taking in the width of Twine was an easy afternoon's adventure for Maple, but taking in the length alongside the river for 20 miles would require a great deal more fuss. She wanted to get the lay of the entire city eventually, and needed better hiking boots for the planned expedition de Urban. Gunter was an off-road ass not built for town traffic and tended to eat people's straw hats if they came too close, so she'd have to leg it instead of hoof it. She stopped outside Lodolph's cobbler's and watched a little old man through the window cobbling away on a big piece of freshly cut Horacian leather. Maple knew it was genuine Horacian leather because of the hump. Perfect. If anyone knew about long-distance walking, it was camels. Cowshoes were good for traipsing about misty moors, and horseshoes perfect for running along cobbled roads. But camel shoes, well, they were the bee's knees when it came to long-distance ambling. Maple frolicked on, singing a song from a Bohemian musical called Itty Bitty Bing Bong, starring that fabulous actress Mims Rosie O'Toole. Twine wasn't without its own creative outlets. Oh no, it was filled with cerebral delights, bookshops, book buyers, bookmakers, tea shops, tea rooms, tea parlours, tea houses, even a tea tree in Tea Kettle Park. Art here was different. It hung about in marble galleries around Twine and was like regular art that went to private school. You'd not find a glorious masterpiece of cats playing canasta here. Oh no, the art in Twine exclusively featured scenes pastoral or parstorial or politically pernicious. Clink the banker eyed Maple with interest as she waltzed past the window of the Twine Savings and Moan, all scarves and taffeta and curly bits. It wasn't often a young girl made the effort, and dressed to the nines in this district. Never mind the 10s and 11s, plus a little silver bell on her hat with a taped-down clapper. He recognised from the pattern of finely stitched embroidery on her blouse that she must be the new fortune-teller in town everyone was talking about at the tea-rooms. Many people wore suits and ties in the suburb of Bilkey-on-Meadows, even the children. One had to walk a good distance norward to find the first pair of overalls, so this young lady in her stripy tights stood somewhat out. The city's prior fortune-teller had been a knobbly old woman named Mrs. Peacock, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances a few months earlier, leaving a gap in the market. Down at the bet shop, someone had placed a wager that the new fortune-teller wouldn't last a season, but Maple was oblivious to the popular scepticism and skipped on. Clink mused briefly that he and the girl were both in the fortune-telling business in a way, only his work centred around moat-gauge rates and cheese futures, and hers the business of divining future prospects for eligible bachelorettes or whatever mystery was conducted in the course of a fortune-teller's day. Clink was what they called a short seller, a tiny man with a big vault containing other people's money. What he lacked in hair he made up for in a keen business eye. Two, in fact. They do say fortune favours the bald.
"Good day, young lady,"
he offered, lifting his top hat as Maple skipped past. He had hopes of securing a new account, and he'd heard stories that witches hoard silver in boxes under their beds. Maple trilled a good morning to you out the side of her mouth and pressed forward. After getting the lay of the local latte lairs, Maple circled back to Lodof's and pressed her face against the glass to gaze at the beautiful boots one more time. The leather, the stitching, the humps.
"Hello,"
said the farrier, squeezing from the store. He had ruddy red cheeks and a little red hat and a green velvet jacket with a white handkerchief poking out the breast pocket.
"Can I help you?"
No, just window shopping.
"Don't stock no windows, miss. Just boots and sandals and lace wax. No market for windows round here on account of people already got windows."
The little man gave Maple the apologetic smile of the overworked tradesman. "Yes, I see. How much for that pair of button-ups?" Maple pointed at the Horacian leather boots resting on a square of white silk.
"That's 3.5 squid.
3.5 squid?
Each.
Each?
There's an awful echo in here, miss. I'll have it looked at. But I'll give you the matching set for 8 squid, and that's at sale prices on account of the ships are late with the new stock."
Maple did the maths on her fingers, and it checked out. "I don't have 8. Will you take 4?
"Yes, but it'll have to be 4 twice round."
"Rats, are you sure you can't let them go for a smidge lower?" Maple frowned longingly at the boots. "Only I'm a little short this month."
"Aye, me too."
The farrier waited for applause, but his was a niche act. Maple pressed her face right against the glass. The boots were virtually made for her. She sighed a wide circle of mist onto the window and gave the little man furtive glances, but he wasn't buying any sympathy this month. The farrier lifted himself on his toes for a second and dropped back down.
"So, tricky business about to Earl of Grey, then? Seems rotten to me, to whole business."
He took off his round spectacles and polished them with a soft cloth. "Sorry, I don't know about it. Who?"
"To Earl of Grey? Surely you know about to one what's missing? It's big news all over the meadows. You must have heard about it."
"I'm sort of new here, actually. I may have seen something or other in the Times."
"Rotten business,"
the farrier repeated. He pulled out a bent nail from his pocket and straightened it with a leathery thumb.
"I wouldn't like to be in his shoes."
"So some earl is missing. I'm sure they go on holiday all the time, these earls."
"Yes, but this one is to Earl of Grey."
"Yes, you mentioned."
"He's to Regency of Twine and all."
"Is he?"
"Very important man."
"You don't say."
There's a reward for his return. 200 squid.
200 squid! That's a lot of boots,
Indeed, indeed.
sympathised the farrier. They stood side by side for a minute, watching the window display and dreaming of better days and better boots.
His bird's all of a tizzle looking for him.
His bird?
His old lady, his ball and chain, his trouble and, strife.
Maple glared at him.
The Lady Grey.
He finished, realising Maple was too young to understand the nuances of traditional idioms or traditional relationships. The conversation had fizzled out, and unsatisfied by Lodof's louche prices, Maple returned home. She broke out a fresh bag of hay for Gunter, and he ruminated quietly in the vacant plot of land behind the caravan. Maple tore off a poster someone had stuck on her door for a magic show, featuring the great How Did He. She'd heard of him down the pub. He was the sort of magician who liked to saw women in half. Maple knew it was the beautiful woman in sequins who actually did the trick, and the magician was actually the assistant, and that was the trick to the trick, the distraction, the old razzle-dazzle. But amateur stage theatrics wasn't particularly her cup of tea. She decided the poster was a load of rubbish, so she crumpled it up and threw it in the stove to help warm the caravan. While the exterior of the caravan was decorated with finely carved wooden lace, once brightly coloured, but the paint had faded over a generation, the interior of the caravan was comfortable and surprisingly spacious, if a little damp. Maple didn't need much space. She lived mainly in the castle of her mind anyway. The castle wasn't all roses and cream inside. There were things moving around the corridors she was afraid to go after, even with a broom. There were some strange happenings inside lately she needed to air out, not to mention the uninvited guest who drank whiskey a lot. A knock on the door roused Maple from an afternoon nap. "Who's it?" she called out, afraid it might be a deranged axe murderer, or worse, the taxman. "I mean, enter if thou wouldst." An old lady waded through the beaded curtain and curtsied. Bless her! Maple heaved a sigh of relief. Old ladies were the best class of custom for an up-and-coming fortune-teller. After about age 50, their brains turned to cottage cheese and were filled with old wives' tales which were very interesting, but tended to miss important parts like the ending. Years of accidentally overhearing the neighbours talk through the wall with a glass propped against the ear left old ladies with a huge bank of half-misunderstood truths and oodles of gossip. Half-misunderstandings and gossip were bread-and-butter pudding to a fortune-teller. Maple pulled a dark purple embroidered shawl over her head, a bit tighter to hide her youth, and hunched over, motioning the little old lady to sit at the little old table. Most fortune-tellers used, Maple vaguely remembered from a class at Witchaven, a deck of tarots. She didn't have any tarots, so instead used an old deck of ordinary playing cards with pictures on the back. She shuffled 6 times. The King of Tarts was missing, but no one had noticed yet, and dealt a card on the table, the 9 of spoons. She paused dramatically. You will be going on a long journey. She dealt a picture of a Spanish adventurer without his shirt on. How did that get in there? Maple blushed furiously and hastily placed the little painted card out of sight. She dealt the cat and then the joker. She didn't remember having those cards in the deck. "Oh my—"
"Go fish,"
said the old lady excitedly. No, that's not how it—" Maple slumped. Cards were hard. There were so many things to remember, like if you dealt a spoon the wrong way around, it meant a party was coming, and the number was how many guests to bake for, unless it was followed by an animal, and then it meant something about a leaky roof. Or was it a great political upheaval?
"Actually, I was hoping,"
said the old lady, leaning in conspiratorially,
"for one of those crystal ball, readings."
"Right, I think we can manage that." Maple brushed a few errant flakes of fish food from her crystal ball and placed it on the table. "Have they gone from you?" she asked in a quavering voice. The question was sufficiently ambiguous to mean just about anything that could upset an old lady.
My poor Jasper!
The lady cried into a black handkerchief.
He was always so full of beans, he was. Don't know what I'll do now.
Ah. Maple pulled her crystal ball a little nearer to hide the opening at the base. Yes, I see a figure. A male. Beckoning me. The old lady wiggled visibly in her seat and appeared to glimmer with excitement. She tried to catch a clearer glimpse of the ball, but Maple kept it almost hidden behind her hands, rubbing it softly and, Maple hoped, mysteriously.
Ooh, ask him about the old bird he done over week. And about the, remains.
Maple had, up until this point, thought she'd heard it all. People killed in bizarre carting accidents, husbands and wives ending up at the bottoms of lakes with their ring fingers mysteriously missing and shoes covered in fast-drying cement. Nothing in the world could have prepared her for this. It's very faint. Did you say the remains?
Oh, yes. He done one just last week. Always was after one or the other. Like the big ones he did. I was okay with it until he started bringing them to the house. Shame, really. They could have been friends if only they'd tried to get along, but you know how it is with males.
Yes, a shame. A tragic shame. Maple ran her forefinger around the ball, wondering if she should stop the session before things got too complicated, but she needed the silver. She decided to change tack. Jasper said something to you just before you saw him last, didn't he?
Did he? Well, I suppose he did.
The little old lady was surprised at the revelation. A fish on the hook. Yes. Maple kept one eye on the old lady and the other on the ball. Even though you never spoke much, he had much to say, in his own way.
Oh, that's right. He was always rubbing against me, putting his head in my lap and...
Hem! Maple wasn't sure she wanted to hear more, not without taking a bath first. The look in the old lady's eyes was a mixture of dreaminess and loathing. Maple recognised the combination instantly, even from across the table. Love. He did love you very much. He says he wants you to be happy without him.
Does he really?
He does really, and he wants you to remember what he said in the will.
The will?
Yes, continued Maple with new confidence. She was, after all, a professional. The will, or a letter, or something he wrote.
I can't imagine he'd be able to write a letter, what with his injured paw and all.
Realisation dawned. Oh, I see. I mean, oh dear, yes, it seems to be a newspaper with wet marks around it.
Newspaper? Well, there was the one time he whittled on the paper, but that was ages ago. It was a Tours Day, I recall, because of the moroscope on the back page said I was to meet a tall, dark stranger.
Yes, that's it. Let's look more closely at that moroscope as it's important. Footnote. A big part of fortune-telling is ABC, always be clairvoyant.
Well, I was mugged in an alley down Petunia Street the next day.
Right. Yes, how terrible. Jasper wants you to know he's very sorry about the newspaper and appreciates what you did for him, feeding him bones and such.
Bones? I don't recall feeding my kitty bones.
The old lady was struggling to pick up the thread of conversation Maple was trying to unbobbin. Oh, I mean, yes, the bones inside the... birds, yes, how literal. Good load of chalkium in bones, yes, good for the fur and whatnot. Jasper really appreciates that.
He did have a lovely coat on him. Used to stroke most of it off on the sofa, though.
Indeed. I'm seeing lots of shedding, hair everywhere, even in the food.
Cor blimey, that's right. We did have a talk about that oft times.
The old lady leaned over to catch a glimpse of the mysteries in the crystal ball, but Maple slid a candle in front as a defensive pawn. Yes, I am hearing his happy meow right now. It's getting faint. Oh dear, he's going. The old lady did not cease from leaning forward, trying to catch a glimpse of her departing companion.
Goodbye, Jasper. Bye, bye.
She gave a little wave at the ball. Maple rolled her eyeballs down from up in her lids one after the other and stood up to indicate the session was over. "He's gone to a better place." The old lady paid 5 silver coins and offered some kind words before leaving. Good. Enough money for supper and a new tablecloth. Pity there wasn't a will, though. That was usually worth a few extra squid. She placed the silver in a little bag and hid it under the mattress where no thief would think of looking for it. It was funny how life turned out. One minute she was dancing around the garden looking for fairies under toadstools, and the next she was working to pay taxes in a cul-de-sac job. It was barely last year she lived with her Auntie Birch in Plimsoll Heath. Things went a bit skew after her mother had shuffled off her mortal coil and left for the stars, but Auntie Birch and Maple generally kept out each other's way until one day, after an argument about tradition, dear Auntie B sat Maple down and demanded she get a man to help her find a place in the world. Maple told Auntie Birch, "I will never, ever, ever bow down to any man, not even a king, not for any reason." Auntie Birch was livid and demanded Maple get married before she turned to seed. This irritated Maple so much she stormed out of Auntie B's cottage and vowed never to speak to her again. Maple's mother had left her only 3 things when she passed on: the wooden caravan, Gunter, and a silver necklace bearing a little white feather charm. It wasn't a particularly charming necklace, quite demure and ordinary, but Maple kept it beneath her tunic, even though the feather tickled her heart sometimes. To Auntie Birch, this behaviour of running off was only solid proof Maple indeed needed a man. She secretly sent out every bachelor in the village to court the obviously repressed girl, and to try and get her to see some sense and get married and have bubbies and finally be happy. However, after visiting with Maple for more than a few bells, some of the men became rather quiet and withdrawn from the world. Some had gone off on quests to find themselves, which is a silly thing for anyone to do for obvious reasons, as the journey invariably turns full circle. A few men had given up girls altogether and joined a monastery up in Northumberland where, they say, monks could think in peace without women baking things at them. Maple had that kind of effect on people, like a small private tsunami. When she hooked up Gunter to her mother's caravan, her inheritance, and set out to live off the kindness of strangers in the bustling duo metropolis of Twin and Twine, she thought she would escape the village traditions and the inevitable life of servitude to some boorish man who would only talk about carriages and horsepower and how silly witches are. Maple was wholly unlike her aunt and despised tradition. Settling in wasn't all going easy. There were unending taxes for a start. Fortune-tellers were a rare sight in Twine. Twine was a city of stiff logic and mathematics. The mystics and whatnots generally preferred to congregate on the opposite bank of Twin, where rent was lower and a pleasing bardeau could be had for thruppence a horn. Fortune-telling was a mysterious craft by design, shrouded in a cloak of unspoken rules. There were questions people never dared ask, such as, why don't ghosts fall through the floorboards? Or, how come that little piece of string at the end of the table wiggles every time there's a thump from the other side? And who knitted the sun god's trousers? Fortune-tellers found questions quite easy to answer, unless a child asked them. Adults were prone to deep thinking, and thus any tales of the sun and moon would ring true somewhere in their mind because they knew everything and could thus be fooled by new information. Children, however, knew very little about answers, but they knew all about tricky questions and games and the pulling of strings under the table, and were generally discouraged from entering Maple's little caravan. In fact, during her first week of practice, she put a chalkboard outside that read, "Noe und 18s." But this seemed to attract teenagers by the dozen who thought it was a mobile, smutty painting cart. Anyway, the sign was stolen by one of them 1 week hence. Or was it prior? Time sloshed around the mind of a fortune-teller like a casket of whiskey on a merchant ship, and sometimes she forgot where she put her spectacles next Tuesday. Vinny was what they called a Visigoth, on account of his latent talent with making paintings and, while we're being honest, forging them. He liked to wear tight black leather trousers, greased back hair that fell to his upturned collar, and a matching set of dark and brooding eyebrows. He leaned against a pillar outside Arte and Arte Supplies, chewing on a snake and kidney pie, and thought about auctions. Auctions paid a pretty squid for a proficiently painted portrait. Usually, paintings didn't have much truck with Vinny, who preferred real arts like table making and pig skinning, but now and again he would lean to and look at the paintings through a gallery window and wonder how the other half lived. Twine seemed like it was a city of intellectuals who understood the mysteries of the scholars and people who had seen the ballet at the ball show and what not. Gazing through windows was still free in the suburb of Bilkey-on-Meadows, despite the rising horse manure costs. Footnote: horse manure is vital to the economy. You've heard the expression, shit happens. Well, it has to happen before anyone can grow corn and before any corn-fed labourers can build things like windows. Vinny thought it was all just so much squiggles and squirts and didn't understand why someone couldn't just paint a tree when they wanted to show a tree. There was all this symbolism in paintings nowadays. It took an arts degree just to understand the titles of some of them. Vinny the Goth was convinced it was all a fat con. These con artists were just slapping paint on canvas and then making up stories about it while drinking too much crab synth. Vinny wasn't against cons per se, if they were honest. He had sold more than a few valuable items that had fallen off the back of a cart in his 27 years. Honestly, I can do better, he thought. An idea reached out from the frosty window and landed in his head, roughly near where his brain would have been had it not been mostly withered by wine, women, and bad singing brought on by a combination of the first two. Ideas didn't happen often to Vinny, so he was quick to reach out and throw a mental sack over it and drag it into the alley where he kept his private thoughts. He tossed the pie bone into the gutter and strode into the arty shop confidently. The door tinkled above him, and a woman behind a firm desk looked up startled, like she had just seen a beggar. Vinny's frayed white shirt and greasy fingers didn't help.
"Watcha, love, got any oily paint?"
he asked. The woman gasped. She stood up and walked in front of a painting of a duck, trying to block his view.
"My dear sir,"
she said in a diamond tone that suggested she had been raised by butlers and that the word sir had different context depending on the company.
"may I help you?"
"Packet of oily paints and a brush, please, love. Got any pig's wool brushes? Good for doing walls, they is."
Fond memories of painting the kitchen table with his dar creeped through the back streets of Vinny's mind. Things had been simpler in Gothland, but after the Great War came the Great Elation, and then the Great Deception. Jobs became scarce as a hen's pecker, as they said in Francia, forcing workers to find work elsewhere. Vinny fled the derelict ruins of his home to seek his fortune in the great big and solvent city of Twine. So far he had only encountered rats and the posh, and he didn't know which was worse.
"We only have sable brushes, sir."
"You constipated?
"Sir."
Have a drop of Jerry ale. Clear you right out, it will."
The pale, thin woman was speechless. Her teeth gnashed, her black smock hissed and swished with disapproval. If she wore a bridle, it would be tinkling. She finally unfroze and reached down to get a little box of paints and a brush. She held it in front of her defensively, trying to avoid any form of human-Vinny contact. Vinny suppressed a gag reflex when he saw the price tag, but dug deep in his pocket and counted out the squid coins while his poker face worked in overdrive.
"Starry night tonight, you think?"
"Why, I don't rightly know."
The woman found her voice hiding behind the easels. She was not one to worry about weather and temperature. She had people for that. She only minded the shoppy because it kept her occupied during the lonely bells between counting money and shouting at the maid. Vinny the Goth grudgingly handed over the last of his savings, scratched his ear, burped, and left. As he walked on with his head in a cloud, a frog dressed in little Hessian trousers and a tiny blue hat bounced off out of his way and went sploosh in the gutter. It grabbed its hat floating on top of the water and swam across to warmer times.
That's strange,
Thought Vinny.
I never knew frogs wore hats.
Maple had no sooner brushed up after her last client when another knocked on the window with silver in hand. Business was, as they said in the cannonball industry, booming. Maple gave the customer a brief reading at the kitchen table and then sat her on the rug. She picked up the tools of her trade from the armoire de cuisine and laid them out in a sacred circle, spoons upward. Branching out into other forms of magic, like reading tea leaves and teaspoons, was tricky, what with the unions and all, but desperate times and desperate measures and all that. Maple sat cross-legged on the rug, while the old lady, who thought herself middle-aged, tried to cross her legs without wincing. To achieve enlightenment, first you must clear your thoughts. Maple pressed her forefingers into her thumbs.
Clear my purse more like.
The old lady mumbled.
Feels enlightened already after my tarot reading.
The price of the future cannot be measured in worldly terms, explained Maple enigmatically.
Never heard of anyone using actual tarots before,
the old lady retorted. Her legs were creaking almost to breaking point trying to mimic Maple's knots. They're very knowledgeable tarots and quite delicious in soup. Maple pouted, and the old lady decided to let things be. Anyway, it is not the method, it is the result. We don't question the brand of tea leaves brings us the message. We simply read their mysterious message. Now clear your thoughts of material things.
Like money.
Shh, the old lady mumbled to herself. Now I am going to lead you through a guided medication.
Don't you mean meditation?
Shh, listen properly. As I said, I am going to lead you through a guided meditation to enlighten your thoughts and your chaclets. The old lady, who thought herself middle-aged, opened one eye and peered at Maple, but said nothing. How old was this sprite of a girl actually? 20? 16? The makeup and shawl hid her features, and the dark light in the caravan made it difficult for middle-aged eyes to see details. When the girl looked one way, she was naught but a girl with an upturned nose and hazy, if somewhat bidirectional eyes. But when she turned her head to the side, she appeared as a worldly woman. An optical illusion, they called it. Such was the wont of real magic, she concluded. Wouldn't mind getting a pot of whatever cream the girl uses, though, she thought. The girl's skin was broken only by a little acne on her cheeks. She didn't even have flea bites. The old lady had come to Maple because of the poster outside the library offering a free tarot reading. And, well, things had become a little lonely in the cottage. The poster had a white lily on it, and white lilies were her dear Neville's favourite thing in the whole world. Besides her, of course. It was undoubtedly a sign. She could still feel his hands around her waist, dancing the choo-choo with her, even though his half-righties bit him. He was a good man, the best. Maple's voice seemed to slow down in her throat, as if by treacle. See? Now her voice quivered. She fell over onto the rug. The oldish lady opened her eyes a bit, trying to figure out if the girl would be pulling any secret strings, but Maple just lay on the rug, dead quiet. "Deirdre," Maple whispered in a hoarse voice, or rather something whispered in Maple's voice, hoarsely. "Deirdre."
Neville?
"Yes, who's calling, please?" "Oh, wait, it's my Deirdre. That's right. Hello, Dee," the muffled voice said happily from within the carpet where Maple's face was buried.
Oh, Neville.
The old lady put her wrinkled hands against her face and tried to contain her gasps.
"Put
the cat out, will you?" Maple/Neville rasped.
Okay, Nev, I will.
"I must go now. I'll see you later then. Thanks for coming."
No, Neville, wait. There's so much I have to say.
Maple sat up. "Now where is it?" she whispered to herself while reaching behind her back. "Oh yes, here it is." There was a plop, and a fizz rose from the candle. Maple hung the string on its nail under the table. She wiped her eyes. She must have fallen asleep. The old lady clasped Maple's hand fondly and lay 6 silver coins across it, 4 up and 1 on either side, as was tradition. "That's way too much," Maple said. "I only charge a fourier to pensioners."
Please take it.
Deirdre said with tears in her eyes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Maple looked around confused. It was only a small firework, hardly worth 6 squid. She bit one of the coins to be sure it was genuine and counted the tentacles. She didn't complain about the windfall, though. At least now she could pay off the protection money to the insurance company. They were clearly a very good insurance company because they always knew exactly when a shoppy was going to burn down, so it was best to give them money to cover future logistics expenses. Making money was awfully expensive in this city. Real tarot candles cost a small fortune here too. She made a mental note to go into Twin on the weekend and buy a few bushels at the greengrocer's. Those tarots were knock-offs, but what was good for the goose was good for the salamander, or something along those lines. The echo in her head bothered her. Her thoughts didn't come and go like they used to. They sort of sloshed around and lay at the foot of... "Who's there?" she asked the empty caravan. She slid a finger under her collar and touched her mother's silver necklace, which she often did when she was nervous. She really wasn't expecting anyone to answer, especially not from inside her own head. Vinny put on his heavily darned socks, stretched widely, and said good morning to the unknown woman asleep in his bed. She breathed deeply, causing the blanket to firmly hug her chest in a manner that pleased Vinny's artistic acumen. What was her name? He had met her at the back of the bar where all the interesting women congregate, singled her out like an injured deer, applied his patented smoulder, and let her seduce him. That was the trick. Let them think they were the ones flirting. He buckled up his patent-pending leather boots and opened the newspaper. His lips moved as he read the first line. The Times. Good rag this, he thought, worth nicking every fortnight from the candy stand. Footnote: the only other newspaper in Bilkey-on-Meadows, the Sage, was not well respected, having recently been more preoccupied with sporting, political and weather reports than real gossip. "How did he vanishes?" the headline said in a loud font.
"That old con man? Still pulling the same tricks, sawing women in half, making cards vanish up his sleeve. He must have hired some right sucker of a promoter to buy this headline."
The story seemed plausible too. How did he, the world-famous magician and mentalist, vanished from stage last night? After being suspended bottom-side up in a glass vat, topped off with watery, he pulled off an amazing sight. The renowned escape artiste vanished in front of the astonished crowd in a big puff. Patrons were heard baying as they waited for his return, but never heeded. When asked for a refund, the manager said the money too had disappeared mysteriously. Whereas, how did he? Why did he vanish?
Good one, that. Make a killing, then make a run for it. Don't even need no outlay for tricks and magic ropes and places to hide sawed-off women and whatnots.
But Vinny conceded he could never do that. There was a certain honesty among cons in this city, and he felt guilty if a con wasn't done right. Vinny picked up a brush and started to push some nectarine paint around the canvas. He ran a hand through his thick, well-creamed hair and waited for inspiration. He held the brush to his nose. Bloomin' smelly stuff, he thought. The easel, made from the seat of an old chair the neighbour had apparently not wanted, creaked with every stroke until the whole canvas was covered in Prussian blue. Footnote: similar to Russian blue, but with P in it. Vinny sighed and looked dreamily out the window in the hopes of catching a ray of inspiration. The stars were shining bright. There was a farmhouse on the hill with the lights twinkling in the distance. His head spun from not eating dinner and inhaling paint thinner. This is not complicated, he thought. and painted what he saw.
What is it?
The woman asked, holding the blanket modestly to herself. Considering all the things they had done the night before, and undone, it was hardly needed.
The sky,
said Vinny, and twirled the brush in a circle. He had no idea why he painted a golden circle just there over the road by the signpost, but he did. The painting prickled at him. The woman said something else, but Vinny had a one-track mind, and his locomotive was now firmly on the creative line. At some point, the woman left without a note of address. After completing the clouds, Vinny took a break and stopped by the local snake-away shop.
is that genuine cobra curry?
He asked. The man in the long robe nodded. He wore the garb of an Oriental, and even though he bore a faint glow of Frankish perfume about him, it was clear he was playing a part in some culinary show.
I'll get one cobra curry and a bowl of bull bays on the old book, all right?
I beg yours, the old book.
The chef wiped a dark red liquid from his hands with a striped cloth.
You know, on tick.
On tick.
Come on, mate. The old get you on the flip side if you take my whistle.
The Orientalist's face furrowed.
I get the impression you are inquiring about credit.
Got it in one.
No.
Right. How about a little aftermarket trading for a highly sought-after and valuable painting?
Vinny pulled out the trump card from behind his back. The Orientalist leaned forward.
Of what exactly?
He plucked at his mousetail moustache, which was so long it almost reached his shoulders.
It's a road in the forest, see?
Oh, you've painted it already,
said the man.
I thought you were just showing me the canvas.
Vinny got the distinct impression the man was not an artes and crafties connoisseur.
Me? No, not me per se, no. This one is by the great
Vinny grasped at names he'd seen at the Galleria.
Da Vinci.
What the Oriental lacked in patronage, he more than made up for in investing acumen, and was instantly suspicious.
Is that so? Why are you in possession of it?
It's a family heirloom on me mother's side.
And how did she come by it?
She nicked it.
Vinny knew one thing about the modern artes and crafties world. A painting's value had more to do with the story than the paint. Sure, there were limited collections of old misters which sold for a fortune, but breaking into the market required a little razzle-dazzle, a little pizzazz, a few little leads. The Orientalist scratched a corner with the tip of his fingernail and sniffed, but he found not even a peach or a cherry blossom scent.
I'll wager it's not even a proper forge, but a complete fake. However, I can use the board to stop up my basement window as I can't be bothered to run down to the carpenter's. I'll trade you for a bowl of deep-fried tentacle.
2 bowls and a loaf of bone bread.
Footnote: lay out a flat sheet of dough and spread generously with pestgro and barlic. Roll the dough around a large marrow bone. Bake until your toes curl.
1 bowl and a hunk of bone bread, and you can keep the bone.
Vinny spat in his hand and offered it to the man.
No, that won't be necessary. We have napkins.
The man busied himself greasing his wok.
This may in any event be the last order.
Closing early tonight?
No, closing for good. New city ordinance. Foreign foods will no longer be permitted in Twine come new moon. Only traditional Twinian cuisine may be procured. Unfortunately, I do not possess the utensils for Twinian cheffery nor the rodents.
Hey, I know where you can get some copper pots and pans. You could pivot to fish shoppy.
Can't afford the overheads. Shop's been suffering of late because of the order.
The order? You got a big order?
No, the order. They have, how would one explain in the vernacular, put the squeeze on me.
Oh, a protection racket. Yeah, that happens, mate. Look, I'll sort you out for some pots and pans. Don't you worry. We're businessmen. The one hand washes the other, aye?
Ugh, but if needs must, how much will it cost me?
Cost you? You break my heart, you do. Can a friend not help another through a hard time?
Not in this city, so how much?
2 hots and a bottle of beer a day, and I'll keep this order or whatever away too.
I doubt that. They're chiefly a large military detachment,
lamented the Oriental, who was actually a man named Clyde Higgins from Crimpeline Park, but had found the way to make money in the food trade is to cast an aura of mysterious promise.
Aye, that's serious business, that is. What's going on around here? Everyone's walking about on tippy toes. Can't even get merryweed at the greengrosser no more. Oh.
That, my dear sir, is an excellent question. But don't go messing around with the order. They'll have your goat as soon as cook it.
Do you have any...
No, that dish is sold far, far windywards.
Right.
said Dr. Robart Feck authoritatively to the pimply student body with heads to match.
Are there any metamaths questions you need help with?
The junior class for cloggy students never answered the general question on account of general shyness, but it was compulsory for professors to ask. Footnote: someone with clever clogs is traditionally from Dentland, where iron is found close to the surface, and the Iron Age had thus brought them to engineering and iron oxhide paint. Students never answered when asked. Instead, they asked at the most inconvenient time, which is the wont of gifted youth. Robart didn't look like your typical professor. He was young, gangly, and owned a head of short orange hair and light orange eyebrows. He had freckles on his nose and a thin face with too many teeth that struggled to sit quietly in his mouth. He spoke with a twangy voice like a banjo played on a lonely mountain, and perhaps the students didn't take him too seriously. Blank expressions fell like autumn leaves over the dry river of ignorance. Robart wasn't much older than his students on account of being diagnosed with clever clogs as a child, and the students never let him forget it. Once students found out you yourself were cloggy, they hated you. He soon found a home at Greenbridge University where he could focus his gift away from the meanderings of the common child, or worse, students from Foxwood University.
What's a coefficient?
Asked a young boy.
That's an excellent question,
replied Robart, and the boy beamed at his own cleverness.
It's a number used to make another number bigger or smaller. That's why it's called a coefficient, because it scales.
The boys scribbled notes in their notebooks and made drawings of Robart's teeth.
Mr. Feckle?
A boy of about 10 raised his hand.
That's Dr. Feck.
Robart pointed at his name on the board. He had heard every variation of his name over the first week of class. Dr. Freckle, Dr. Frick, Dr. Frock, Dr. Censored. This special university class was offered to the most precocious children from the lower schools around town. The students were either very cloggy and warranted special attention from the university, or their parents were very financially viable. The boy lifted up his notebook.
Yeah, about this problem with the apples. It says I had 5 apples, but then I took away 5 apples, leaving no apples.
That's right, a fundamental metamathematical premise.
Yes, but how does I know they was apples if there isn't any left? How does I know they wasn't bananas or dewberries? It could have been anything, really.
Well,
Robart was nonplussed and slightly non-minused by the boy's question.
that's not the point of the exercise.
The boy sighed loudly.
Well, I think it ought to be the point. You don't want to go around counting things you don't need to count all day.
The boy glared reproachfully at Robart, who swallowed hard in defence.
Sir, I can't solve this problem,
said another small voice. The dark-haired boy it belonged to looked like a very scared ant. Good old jackers. The boy's raised hand shivered slightly. Robart knew it must have taken great courage to raise the issue at hand. He was also very glad for the interruption.
Good, well done that boy,
he said with great relief.
Well, come on down and write it on the board.
It would be about Daisy's last quandary again. It always got young jackers confused. The trick was to factor in enough muons until you had a full herd. The boy stood up nervously and made his way to the front of the auditorium, cheeks bright red. He picked up the chalk and shakingly wrote his problem on the board and moved aside. Robart moved to the board and raised his chalk to write the answer.
He
said, tapping the board. He raised his hand as if to write, and then lowered it again. He put his hands on his hips and tapped a foot repeatedly on the floorboard. He sighed. After 3 tinkles of silence without turning, he said in a small voice,
I'd like you all to leave now.
Robart retreated to his office, pondering the disappearance of 3 cows. Thanks to a snotty-nosed boy, they had disappeared from the planet quite unexpectedly. He looked at both sides of the scrap of paper he had copied in case he had missed something. 3 cows minus 6 cows equals? This was a rather metaphysical quandary, and Robart found himself pondering the existence of himself and bovines in general. He sat on the problem for a while, or rather, failed to sit on the solution. He brushed off a quantum premise he had been working on for 3 months from his whiteboard and wrote up the problem. He stared at it with one hand pinching his chin. Metamaths was ground truth. It was the key material in the very building blocks of the universe. If metamaths was broken, it meant. He called to the assistant in the hall office and cancelled lectures for the rest of the day while he probed the problem. Was he at fault, or was metamaths itself the problem? Robart poked at the imposing whiteboard, half-heartedly trying to find some meaning to his life, but found no solace, not even a quantum. There were no such things as anti-cows, were there? Taking a fresh piece of number 4 green chalk, he tried Rancid Scroat's purloined conjecture, but like the final piece in a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, it didn't fit. Jeremy's adjacent slid off the edge of the whiteboard and landed in a heap next to the rubbish bin. He tried Boycroft's coronary and Spiegler's mirror. As a last resort, he tried the dreaded long division, but even that didn't fit. He didn't see the girl until she touched his arm. "Hello," she said. He jerked aside and looked down at the loosely assembled pile of lace and lavender standing before him. "Are you the famous Dr. Feck?" The girl looked like a runaway hobo, but one who picked her clothes from only the best rubbish bins.
That's a very good question,
said Robart. He suddenly remembered there weren't any girls at Grainbridge. Mrs. Gruffleberth the cook didn't count. Girls existed, technically, but none had ever appeared in the university since Philip Pullman's mother had come storming in and pulled him out by the ear during a particularly tricky lecture on quantum superpossession. Philip was thoroughly humiliated, much to the delight of the cruel student body, and they called him Dr. Redlobe and Philia Pulmer. There was no going back after that, and after falling behind on his teaching, Philip was told to relinquish his post. Robart had replaced him by default due to being next on the list, as well as being the only other candidate on record who could do the sums. Sort of. "Well, are you or aren't you?" the girl asked.
OK, yes, let's suppose for the interim that I am the...
As a professor of quantum metaphysics, Robart was hard-pressed to give a straight answer to anything. "Only I need a doctor." The girl did indeed look distressed. Must have a bunny in the oven, thought Robart.
I'm not that sort of doctor, my dear.
"Aren't you a seantist?" Robart leaned down slightly and spoke slowly and deliberately so that her smaller female brain could understand the complicated words.
Well, actually, I'm what's called a physicist.
Good, 'cause what I got is physical.
No, you've misunderstood.
Robart didn't see any obvious injuries, but girls had a plethora of hidden mysteries hidden about their person beyond the ken of medicine.
This is a seance lab. We do seance, but we call it metaphysics here. It's very complicated, but I digress. What's wrong with you? Who are you? And where's your mother?
I think I've been possessed. Maple Leaf St. Clair. And I don't know. I thought I knew, but now I don't know any more. Robart could relate to at least one of those points, but still, she was a girl, and so it followed logically that she must have girl problems.
Right. Well, if you're in the family way, I suggest you find the nurse in town. She's more, equipped for that sort of thing.
No, it's not a medicational thing, Dr. Feck. It's sort of to do with dimensions.
Right, absolutely. Yes, I'm not with you.
I've sort of picked up a person.
Have you? Jolly good. Good for you. Still completely lost?
Goes by the name of Alessandro de Romerez Vasquez d'Ortega.
You lost me at hello, actually.
And I'm not sure what to do about it, because even though I'm a fortune teller, thing is, it's always been a sort of an act, you see, a parlour trick. There's not really fortune tellers. I mean, you will know better than anybody. There's just ordinary people who can say what was about to be said. Sort of, you know, like a how did a trick. So this has come as a terrible shock. And I demand you take a look at my head on account of me being a taxpayer, and I don't want anyone named Alessandro de Romerez Vasquez d'Ortega trundling around inside me without a permit, do you understand?
Yes, completely.
You do?
No, it sounds complicated. There's a high probability you're pulling my leg. I'd say 75%.
I'm not pulling anything, honest, Maple said with tears in her eyes. Oh, just forget it. She turned and stomped out loudly.
Forget what?
Robart asked the empty office. The girl in the lace dress was clearly genuinely distressed. He stuck his head out the door to watch her stomp down the corridor. It was lunch, and there were throngs of boys, and they all parted for her like minnows parting for a shark at dinner time. He wasn't planning on listening to a girl, but he was devoted to séance, and she did say something about a problem with fortune-telling, which was loosely related to quantum divination in an educated backwards quillbilly sort of way, just like gastrology, divining truth from beans, was related to gastronomy, cooking them. So something was indeed up. He jogged after her.
Miss?
Maple turned and wiped a smudge of mascara from her cheek with an embroidered sleeve. Robart cleared his throat.
There's a medium-low but stable probability that we are going to have a cup of tea and talk about whatever it is that's bothering you.
He gestured down the hallway to the cafeteria. Maple was confused at the professor's strange gangly manner, and she unpicked his words like one unpicks a silk nightie, carefully. His clothes hung from his scrawny frame like they had been thrown on by an angry butler. His mop of red hair was a mess. His shoes had never seen polish but once, and he had the wrong sock on one foot, which she could tell because his trousers were 3 thumbs too short. He was far too young to be an old man, even though he had a reputation down Twin for being the smartest man in Twine on account of he held 2 degrees in metaphysical séance. He was always in the newspaper blowing things up. He helped build the Large Halibut Collider at Lucerne and shot 2 tiny roe at one another at high speed and collapsed Mrs. Flatworth's mice cream shop on Topper Lane 20 miles away in a loud bang that shook the city. The Times had published the headline, "Now I am become death, destroyer of swirls." Robart had apologised profusely and helped clean up the lactic acid which had fused with the shoppy paint to form a new cleaning compound they now used down the shipyard, and that showed great character, turning a bad situation into a good one. If that wasn't enough, he was also the youngest person to win a Nobel Prize in metaphysics. Maple shrugged. Yes, she replied hopefully. I suspect you're right. They walked down the hall to the cafeteria, ignoring the stares of all the boys walking in the opposite direction. It wasn't that girls weren't allowed at the university. They were. It was just that, according to boys, girls always had other things to do, like wash their hair, or make babies, or do important things with cushions. Robart fidgeted nervously. What did one say to a girl? There were no books on the subject, he'd checked. He decided to say nothing while she talked at him, which was coincidentally the exact right thing to do in that situation. 2 bells of listening and 10 cups of strong alpacan special brew. Later Robart stumbled out of the cafeteria with his head in a spin. The girl had read his mind using no more than a spoon and a jar of sugar cubes under double-blind conditions, that is, using 2 napkin blindfolds. No matter what he thought, she was there 1 step ahead with the answer in a deep voice. It was all too much, really, the day, the whole lot of it. "So, can you help me?" Maple asked. Robart wasn't sure. He had to calculate the probability, but it wasn't looking promising. He began and fainted. When he came to, he was sitting in a chair in a dimly lit broom closet, and Maple was mopping his brow. A light bulb went tick-tick-tick above his head. "I think you've had too much tea," said Maple. "I've never seen anyone drink 10 cups of alpaca without dying before. It's done your head in. You should get it examined."
You're not wrong about that.
Groaned Robart, and wiped sweat from his brow with trembling hands.
I tell you what, I'll punch some numbers and go through the university archives and see what comes up. There's bound to be a paper on human superpossession somewhere. If you ask about regular common or garden quantums, we've got loads. But people are a little more tricky to include in calculations, especially when it comes to long division.
Robart shuddered at a repressed homework trauma. What exactly is a quantum?
Excellent question.
Robart remained silent. But you understand my problem?
A little better now, yes, but it will take time to process all the information. I've never heard so many words at once. My mind...
"Maybe another tea sometime," Maple offered, with a small smile that said, "If you don't mind, and I'll be ever so grateful if..."
Yes, quite. Perhaps.
Robart swallowed.
On the weekend? Definitely. A high probability. Over 80%.
"All right, come by my caravan on Drury Lane on Saturday morning. If you like, I mean..."
Yes, I could come at 10, if that's okay with you.
"It's fine, if you're free."
Yes, I am. If you don't mind.
"I was the one asked you."
Yes, quite.
Robart twisted his hands around each other.
I'll be there with bells on. I mean, not with actual bells. I'll have trousers on.
Thrilled to hear it. "Look, I've got to go now. I have another client and I don't want to be late."
Could I walk you?
Robart offered to his own surprise. "But it's 5 miles. No, you're too kind. My S is parked outside."
Is it? Good heavens.
"Yes, he's quite happy eating some straw. Good pile of straw you have out front."
Ah, I see. I don't recall the university having straw. We do, however, have a history of artisan crafts building with a thatched roof.
"Ah, right. I'd better be off then."
Right.
"Right." Maple clicked her fingers and left properly this time without looking back. She was going to get to the bottom of this. No man named Alessandro de Ramirez Vasquez d'Ortega was going to get under her skin, let alone inside her head, without introducing himself properly first. It was basic manners. She felt Alessandro wander around her head more often than not now, strolling through her memories like he was shopping for snaked beans or just sort of sitting there, smoking a long pipe and blowing smoke rings with her thoughts. It was very rude of him to start telling her things about people. As soon as she figured out how he got in, she was going to see him out with a good talking to. He was completely ruining the whole experience of fortune-telling. It was about this time that Rusty Weatherspoon, a little boy of around 9.5 big moons, poked his very long stick behind a big giant cooler bin on the back of Rapolo's greengrocer. Something scuttled and ran for the next cooler bin at the back of the Krusty Pie's storeroom. The storeroom housed the majority of the shop's crustables, meaty things with green spots and a whole block of blue with some cheese spots in it.
"I've got one,"
Rusty beamed, holding the rat up by its tail. The rat was having none of it, and as soon as the storekeeper bounded into view, it scarpered up Rusty's arm, down his tunic, made a brief detour, and exited his short trouser leg and shot off like a spoon.
"Oh, blast you, boy. You're supposed to catch the blighters, not give them away to the general public. Now what am I supposed to put in my cheese and mousetrap soup?"
Rusty peered behind the cooler bin and sighted expertly along the length of the wall.
"I think there's another one,"
he rallied.
"Well, don't let it get the better of you,"
volleyed the storekeeper, holding the wall behind him in case he needed to make a hasty escape. He loved all of the sun god's animals. They were delicious, but their little claws scuttering across the tiles still gave him the heebie-jeebies. Rusty tightened the shoelace holding his 2 sticks together and poked onward, this time prepared for a bounder. What he did not expect was the low growl, a throat-clearing rising in pitch like an old tea kettle on the boil. As the wild beast shot forth, Rusty grabbed it by the scruff and dragged it wailing and hissing out from the bin. It was the ugliest rat he had ever seen, covered in grey and brown fur, a short stubby face and almost no nose. As he pulled the giant monster to his chest to thwart its escape, it gave off a whirring noise, a low-pitched throbbing hum, and promptly fell asleep against his chest.
That's disgusting,
shouted the pieman.
Isn't it? Too ugly for pies at any rate.
Go on, take it out of here. I've got a business to run. My customers will lose their appetite if they see that thing. Oh, my sainted aunt, what is that on the bottom of its paws?
Looks like little round pads. Must be blisters, sir.
Ugh, all right. Grab yourself a packet of drum bugs and take that thing away. Go on.
Right-ho, ta.
Rusty clutched the thing by its neck, but it made no effort to claw his eyes out. It started licking itself with a hideous leathery tongue. Rusty walked around town with the thing under his arm looking for a buyer. He stopped by the butcher and was chased out for dragging fur into the place. Even the tanner didn't want it, nor the taxidermist with the sign outside that read, "You gotty it? Well, get her stuffed." He had almost exhausted the establishments when he spied a heavily decorated caravan down the end of a cul-de-sac nestled among a few brave trees. He approached with a low whistle. He'd heard stories about fortune-tellers, how they'd lift their dress for a thruppence. He hoped nothing traumatic like that would happen, and approached anyway. An ass gloated at him. He jingled the doorbell nestled in between layers of embroidered cloth and waited. "Yes? What's dis thy want?"
"Hello, miss,"
the boy shouted through the door.
"You the fortune-teller?"
He knocked spuriously and impatiently.
"Hello, come look what I got."
Maple fought the withered door until it let go of the damp doorframe and opened. She stared. "What is it?"
"It's on sale, this week only."
Maple salivated instinctively. "I only have silver pieces at the moment." The boy peered at her deeply.
"I thought you was older."
"I was. She was, the old fortune-teller. I'm the replacement." Maple looked closely at the bedraggled pile of fur under the boy's arm and shrugged. It squirmed slightly. "What's wrong with it?"
"Wrong. It's a pet. Designer breed it is, all the fortune-tellers have one. You can have it for 2 threepenny bits."
Footnote: Pins are quite rare in twine on account of their precision engineering and can be traded at most stores for squid notes. There are 33 thruppence to a squid and 5 squid to a tickle. 10 tickles make a nonce, and so on. Maple poked the thing, and its nostrils flared. "Aren't you the rat catcher? If it's a rat, I don't want it. What I need is fewer rats." Maple slammed the door shut, pulled the hem of her dress out from the doorframe and slammed it again.
"I'll just have to drown it then,"
said the boy loudly and gloomily, and walked away whistling a sad tune. The caravan door opened a smidge, and Maple sighed at the boy. "Bring it here." 6 bins lighter, Maple plopped down the furball on the kitchen table. The thing was a sort of grey-brown mix, like an unbaked cookie that had fallen into a machina at a fur coat factory. It mowed at her, and she offered it a Russell sprout, which it sniffed at and ignored, so she gave it a long slice of giraffe's liver, which it gobbled up, and this seemed to calm it down a little. "You stay in the corner, but as soon as I find a home for you, we are done. Do you understand? I don't need any, whatever it is you are, in my life." The thing mowed again and licked its lips. Its face really was quite flat, like it had run into a wall and lost. It blinked at her twice and fell asleep. Maple was just about to lock the caravan for the evening when another knock happened. Business is throbbing today, she thought. She pulled aside the beaded curtain to find an officious-looking black carriage escorted by 4 horsemen and 2 running guards with long spears. A grey thistle was painted on each of their shields, indicating they were of great importance and members of the royal guard. A footman lowered the stairs and a woman stepped from the carriage. She looked around for a little while and then strode confidently to the caravan.
Are you the one they call Maple Leaf?
The woman inquired. She was no old lady, rather a regal-looking woman in a neat black dress. She carried a black briefcase with the city emblem embossed on the side. Maple panicked. Look, I'm going to declare all the income, I swear. I just need some time to collate the receipts. The woman's eyes narrowed.
No, that's not why I'm here. This time, I am Lady Camille de Forest Grey. You've heard of me, of course. May I come in? It's a sort of delicate matter.
Yes, of course. Maple invited Lady Grey inside and brushed crumbs and playing cards from the table. She bade Lady Grey to sit on the wooden chair and eased herself onto her seat on the couch bed behind the table. It's 4 silvers to contact a loved one and 10 pins for a load of washing. Thruppence for fabric softener if you don't mind it smelling of wee.
No, you've misunderstood, I'll be frank.
If you must. Maple looked Lady Grey up and down and took in the cut of her black suit. It had faint blue pinstripes and was offset with a white hanky in the breast pocket that looked much like the emblem on the shields outside. Classy.
And you know about my husband?
I do. Oh, wait, you're not the Lady Grey? The one from the cobbler?
I beg yours?
I mean your husband is gone.
That's what I said, yes.
And you want me to call him through the net of ether?
No, I want you to locate him.
You mean on the other side?
On the other side of what?
Lady Grey furrowed her dark black brows quizzically. He's not dead? Asked Maple.
I should hope not,
Lady Grey snapped, losing her patience.
Look here, earls don't go around dying unannounced. There's protocols. No, he's missing, like I said.
Realization dawned on the unwashed shore of Maple's mind. Oh, you want me to find him?
That's right.
Lady Grey crossed her arms, indicating the demand was not really up for debate. You are aware I'm a fortune-teller and not a beagle? Asked Maple.
Yes, I am aware, and thank you for the sarcasm. There are, how can I put it delicately, unusual circumstances around his disappearance that I'd rather not divulge to the international diplomatic police.
What do you mean? Be frank.
Well, for a start, he disappeared from a locked room.
I see. And how do you know it was locked?
Because I locked it.
Maple made a note in her moleskin notepad. Right. Yes. Go on, please.
And there was a chalk drawing left on the floor?
Yes.
Well, it's best you come have a look.
Maple measured the cut of Lady Grey's suit and figured she must be worth a pin or 2. I charge an extra thruppence for house calls.
I shall pay whatever you ask. Just please come and have a look. There's no one else in this city could even hope to understand. And my second Aunt Deidre says you come highly recommended. The whole thing is strange.
She said the last word as if she had tasted the last slice of geese cake left a week long. Strange was a strong word to use in the city of Twine. Twine was built on strange. Strange floated by on barges on the river Styx, on the daily, dressed in red coats and pot hats with X's on them. There were strange people all doing strange things in strange ways, some even legally. People died in strange circumstances all the time. Strange was humdrum, ordinary. But the way Lady Grey said strange made Maple uneasy. Look, said Maple, how do you know he's missing and not just off on a holiday somewhere? Sometimes men, you know. Maple had no idea about men, but she had heard rumours. Men did things. It was annoying.
The note was a giveaway,
said Lady Grey curtly. Ah, you didn't mention the note. What did it say?
You'll have to come and look.
At a note?
Yes, it's sort of strange. Just come and see.
Maple packed an away bag filled with candles, string and a packet of raisin biscuits. House calls always left a fortune-teller peckish, and followed Lady Grey out to the waiting carriage. Lady Grey pushed the carriage into first gear and the horses jolted forward into a canter. There's a lot of horsepower in your average royal carriage, but the torque is terrible around the bends and the horses skittered around the tight corners of Twins twirling streets. Lady Grey put her foot flat and the horses sped along up the winding hill to the palace. The scene of the Earl's disappearance wasn't what Maple was expecting. The door to his private room was bashed open for a start. A dozing guard snapped to attention as Lady Grey arrived.
You may leave, Harold.
But lady...
Thank you, Harold.
The guard slunked off back to marching patrol, muttering under his breath about the slipping standards of project management. Lady Grey ushered Maple into the Earl's chamber and stood to one side. Maple gulped. The first thing Maple observed was the glowing circle hanging faintly in the air, occasionally fizzing sparks in a pleasing way like a soft drink. Ah, that's strange.
That is not the half of it.
Lady Grey pointed at the tiles on the floor where a many-pointed star had been scrawled in something that had perhaps been chalk, but had dribbled at some point. Maple shivered. The room was unusually icy. She reached out a hand to touch the shining circle, but it squirmed out of her way to come back to rest when she lowered her hand. Lady Grey pointed at a note lying on the ground that Maple could see if she looked through the circle one way, but when she walked around the other side, saw only the stone floor.
What does it say?
Asked Lady Grey. Maple went down on her haunches and examined the note as close as she could. The writing was unfamiliar. She had indeed seen many types of writing growing up in the bodegas of Plimsoll Heath, among the artes and crafties community, writing from Bindia and the Middle Feast, Flapanese, and of course, the strangest of all, Lutin. She was fairly certain the characters fizzing in front of her were writing because they behaved like writing, but she couldn't stitch together the words. Is it written in your husband's hand?
It would appear not. The writing is far too neat. The Earl had a scrawl about him. Can you decipher it?
It was a little strange Lady Grey referred to her husband in the past tense. I'll have to, give it some thought. Maple pulled her moleskin notepad from her bag and copied down the writing as best she could. Half the letters were the wrong way round and half were upside down, but even when she turned everything the right side up, it only looked like gobbledygook. She made a copy of the red shape on the ground, which had 10 cardinal points with dots splashed in each ray, as it were.
The servants tried to clean it off, but it comes back.
This is a witch's hex, clear as a bell.
So you recognise it then?
Lady Grey moved about the room doing her own research. Oh yes, it's used to fix a spell or a curse. Terrible bad luck is a hex. Witches who go around hexing people generally do not think on the right side of the tracks, if you follow me. I wouldn't want one on my floor. Lady Grey said.
A bad luck omen.
Oh, definitely. I think it's more of a signature, though, a calling card. But we'd need to know who made it to understand the meaning. You see, each family of witches has their own style and their own set of hexes.
I see. And which family are you? Witch-wise?
Maple gulped. Well, I'm not really a witch. I'm a sort of public school fortune-teller, though my mum was Apple Asian and they were always running around in the forest. You know?
Yes.
Looking for apples. But I do have one GCSE in witchcraft. Footnote, General Certificate in Spells and Enchantments. Did your husband consort with witches much? Asked Maple, hastily changing the subject.
Not witches per se, no. Hussies, yes, 3 of them. Actual witches, not so much.
Maple marvelled at the openness of Lady Grey's marriage. She was frank after all, but Maple had always thought marriages were sort of traditional. She shuddered at her own use of the T-word. Obscene traditions like marriage were old hat, antiquated notions. The Greys had clearly moved on from singular partnerships and opened their minds to whatever it was people did with hussies. Maple took copious notes. Give me their names and I'll pay them a visit. Find out what I can. She was excited. She'd never met a real-life hussy before. She'd met loads of whores and strumpets and slags, and even a sailor's prostitute. Footnote, a slag with a wooden leg. Zrania, but never a hussy. Some said they had beauty marks on their cheeks and tall blonde wigs.
I'll let you use one of the royal carriages to speed things up,
offered Lady Grey, and Maple thought that was incredibly generous. She had always imagined royalty as a sort of poor but snobbish group of people who had battered old luggage and absolute power over the military, but she was in danger of liking the Lady Grey. Maple left the castle and found the carriage back of the stables.
2 horsepower, fuel injection,
instructed the stable boy, showing Maple which end to feed the apples. He went through the controls.
Faster, slower, left, other left,
he demonstrated.
And for Haven's sake, keep clear of the exhaust.
Maple climbed in the carriage nervously and pressed the horses forward. She soon got the hang of the fancy controls. She had grown up riding horses, but carriages were the latest modern twinology to hit the city. She cautiously made her way back to Drury Lane and parked the carriage beside the caravan after a long and complicated series of back-and-forth manoeuvres. She emerged from the carriage carrying a bag full of scribbled notes and 10 pieces of silver, and that was just the start, Lady Grey had assured her. She would pay handsomely to return her husband with his head on. A slight discount was agreed upon should he be returned with his head off. Vinnie the Goth threw a cloth over his first 2 paintings and tucked them under his arm. He took them down Porta Potty Road and tinkled the bell of the prominent Arte Shoppe, a shoppe so exclusive it didn't even have a signboard. You were expected to know where you were or keep well out.
What you think?
Vinnie asked.
I can do 2 for 1. Today only, all right?
I hate it,
said the man in the black suit.
Please take it somewhere and have it burned. Twice, to be sure.
Critics were harsh in this town, Vinnie concluded, and decided to try a more amenable market at the greengrocer's.
Well?
What is?
Asked the greengrocer. A portly man, fresh off a pint of pineapple beer he made in the back room from real pine cones.
I call it the squirm.
Nice, I like it.
The greengrocer, like so many others in the trades, was not a qualified arte aficionado, but he knew arte when he saw it. This was almost certainly arte.
Isa blue.
I'll let you have it for 3 squid, and that's a steal.
I don't know about that. How about I give you a nice poke of nuts, huh?
The greengrocer thrust a scoop into a bucket of walnuts and hazel bolts.
I roast fresh this morning.
Vinnie's stomach rumbled. He was currently between jobs, and it had taken a lot of time learning how to mix sky blue and yam yellow without getting green on the rug.
OK, but make it a big scoop for pleasure. And can I get an apple?
Vinnie walked out the greengrocer, holding his nuts in one hand and the unsold painting in the other. He walked straight into Maple, going the wrong way. His nuts and bolts scattered and clattered on the cobblestones.
Hey, look where you're going, you daft sod!
He shouted. You bumped into me, Maple retorted. She looked down at her blouse, where a picture of swirling stars was now printed across the front. You've ruined it.
Oh, stop shouting. That will come right off.
Vinnie reached out to wipe off the paint and received a smack across the palm.
What was that for? What are you, a wise guy?
How did he? Ask him.
Alessandro said suddenly in Maple's ear. She looked around. What did you say?
I said,
Vinny stepped forward.
are you...
Would you shut up, please? Maple scolded. Now what did you say? Vinny's eyes narrowed into slits. The girl was looking from side to side, and this unnerved him somewhat. There was something strange about her. He wasn't used to bumping into people who told him to shut up. Usually it was he who told others to shut up and give him their money.
What?
Maple held out a hand to keep Vinny at bay, but when she looked inwards, there was nothing more from the inside of her mind. How did he?
Oh, what about him?
Vinny asked, now thoroughly confused. You tell me.
Look, sweetheart, I ain't got time to stand around playing guessing games all day. What must I tell you?
I'm to ask you about him.
Why? Old sod's gone missing. What more do you need to know?
That, I guess. Maple stormed off. Vinny shrugged at himself and took off after Maple, struggling to keep up with her fast pace.
Look, sweetheart, you need to reimburse me for the painting, okay? I can't sell this, it's gone pear-shaped.
He gestured at the canvas, which now bore the imprint of a woman's bosom. Nobody was going to be interested in pictures of that. I don't have to do any such thing. You've ruined my blouse, and it's you who should be reimbursing me, not demanding things.
Fine. We'll call it even, all right?
They walked quickly down Porta Potty Lane. Look, what else do you know about How Did He? Asked Maple. Vinny took an apple from a grocer's stand and snuck it in his pocket for later.
Only what was in the paper. Why?
I'm sort of in the middle of something right now. What was in the paper? Vinny stopped at the newsagent kiosk that also took bets under the counter.
All right, Gerald, you kosher.
Behind his back, he plucked a newspaper from the stand and slid it under his jacket.
All right, Vinny, lad. You want to put a fiver on triple shot at Gasforth Park in the Arvo?
Leave it out, Gerald. You know that mare's only got 3 legs. No, nothing for me today, son. Just visiting my money.
When they were out of sight of the newsagent, Vinny pulled out the newspaper from his jacket.
Go on, read for yourself.
Maple stopped in the middle of the road and traced the story with one finger. Disappeared. Mysterious circumstances. Guards found a strange pattern on the floor. This is becoming an epidemic.
Look, lady, it's been great, but I have to get back and find my nuts.
OK, good luck.
OK.
Vinny clicked his tongue. Wait, I'm sorry, what did you say?
My supper. It's all over the road. I'll need to go hustle a mungo or something for dinner.
Vinny flipped his collar up so that his straight dark hair fell over the back of his shirt. His eyebrows smouldered at Maple. Maple gulped. Oh, well, I am sorry about that. Tell you what, come over to my caravan and I'll make you some dinner. It's probably just minestrone. You know, leftovers in a pot with water, but it's better than picking nuts from the street.
They're walnuts, actually.
Very witty. Sorry, what's your name?
Call me Vinny.
Maple Leaf St. Clair.
All right, Maple. Where are we off to?
It wasn't long before the pot was cooking and Vinny's stomach growling. Alessandro was adamant that Vinny had more to say on the disappearance and poked Maple in the corpus maximus. So, what do you think happened with How Did He?
Probably a con job. It's got the stink of it all over.
I don't think so. Not with that hex on the floor. That's witches all over.
Yes,
said Vinny cautiously, taking in the elaborate decor of bottles and vials that made up Maple's caravan.
I don't mean he did it. I mean someone kidnapped him. Some con. It has all the markings of a good con. Howdeed, he's loaded, you know. Tons of coins in the bank. More than 3 tons, they say. My instincts tell me there's money at back of all of this. I'll put a fiver on it.
He's got money, you say? That is mysterious, then. I'm currently trying to find the Earl of Grey. He's also gone missing, and as it happens, he's also rolling in squid. Do you know anything about that?
Didn't even know he was missing. Is this a new fashion or something?
It was in the newspaper.
I don't read the society pages. I'm a page 3 man myself.
Are you?
Yeah, I can't read more than 3 pages without getting a headache.
But there's definitely witchcraft involved.
If you say so, love.
Vinny wasn't the sort to ask many questions, especially about esoteric things such as moons and witches and gods, and how it all worked under the proverbial hood. Vinny found his brain hurt whenever someone tried to explain it to him. He liked the street. You bought, you sold, you gave, you took. It was all clean and simple, with no forms to fill in and no esoterics. He wasn't even sure what esoterics were, but he knew it had something to do with magic.